Contention 1 is inherency. India's ballistic missile defense systems can counter much of Pakistan's nuclear deterrent, but it can't account for nuclear warheads on Pakistan's F-16 and Mirage fighters. Growing air defenses that have the capacity to take out those aircraft will stoke fears in Pakistan that it will lose the only solid deterrent it has left to protect itself from Indian aggression. That's Roblin 17. India's BMD systems are of greater significance to countering Pakistan's arsenal of short and medium-range ballistic missiles. India's BMD program would only counter a portion of Pakistan's nuclear capabilities. There are also nuclear slung bombs under F-16 fighters, nuclear-tipped cruise missiles on Mirage 3s. India's growing defenses will engender a reaction in Islamabad, fearing that the system will negate Pakistani strategic strike abilities. Next, the U.S. sale of the Integrated Air Defense Weapon System, or IADWS, announced in late February, is a game changer. It fills the holes in India's defense shield, and when deployed, it will take out Pakistan's aircraft deterrents. That's Roblin 226. On February 7th, the State Department authorized a separate deal to purchase the IADWS, comprising of 5 Sentinel air defense radars, short-range Stinger missiles, medium-range missiles for NAS-MAS-2. These supplement India's defense shield against ballistic missiles, providing air defense protection against low-flying drones, cruise missiles, and aircraft. Pakistan is fielding nuclear-capable and surface-launched cruise missiles. Indian defenses failed to prevent a retaliatory Pakistani strike in early 2019. The advantage is nuclear conflict. India is planning to shift to a counterforce strategy versus Pakistan, and systems like the IADWS are a part of that plan. It will destabilize deterrence in South Asia and drastically increase the risk for conflict between India and Pakistan. That's Lawani and Hagelin 17. India might be rethinking its current nuclear strategy, considering a preemptive nuclear counterforce. The status quo retaliation-only doctrine is defensive in nature. Statements from Indian officials suggest India should be shifting towards a counterforce strategy. This strategy is inherently more offensive. Many responses have been dismissive, but take it seriously. Declaratory doctrine does not need to change in order for strategy to change. A counterforce strategy is especially dangerous for South Asia. It creates use-it-or-lose pressures in which each side has an initiative to launch its weapons before the adversary. It can trigger destabilizing reactions with both states moving towards risky nuclear behavior. Hair-trigger retaliatory policies can make operators prone to accidental or unauthorized nuclear use. Counterforce strategies could prompt deterrence instability and create an arms race cycle. Since the Pakistani military is firmly in charge, efforts to enhance Pakistan's uncertainty will be met with more military-led offensive options. This will create a tremendous offensive pressures upon the Pakistani military, especially in crisis scenario. Ambiguity intended to encourage an adversary to imagine the worst could make things worse by locking both states into a prisoner's dilemma that increases the likelihood of conflict. The more you enhance the credibility of resolve for your counterforce targeting by building out mission requirements, the more you intensify the crisis and deterrence and stability. Claims that India's declaratory no-first-use doctrine will signal sufficient restraint are either disingenuous or naive. Indian restraint stems from constant signals of repudiation for restraint. Both of these have been eroded as India has built up counterforce capabilities and cultivated a reputation for toughness. While the United States does not seem to consider the unintended consequences of a rapidly strengthening India upon South Asian stability, the continuing destabilization of the India-Pakistan dyad without American recognition could lead all sides to being woefully unprepared. Next, India will likely be the aggressor after they take out Pakistan's deterrence capabilities. Without rebuke from the U.S. to India, various border disputes and a history of animosity will trigger a war. That's Dalton and Kalwani 19. The current government in India has demonstrated its willingness to take risks. The next crisis starts when an Indian operation, it will quickly escalate to a war. If an analyst continue to assume the next crisis will replay the last one, they ignore alternative scenarios. Modi has taken more calculated risks with military responses. Social media and newspaper headlines widely affirmed and hyped Modi's decision to punish Pakistan. Instead of waiting, might Modi decide to take the initiative to launch an operation to capture territory in Pakistani Kashmir? The scenario is not implausible. Past governments would not have authorized a military operation, but Modi's approach is clearly different. His August decision to revoke the independent status of Kashmir proved popular domestically, which has led some Indian officials to call for a reclaiming of the other half of Kashmir controlled by Pakistan. The international environment for India may also be conducive to risk-taking. Officials believe that they have the international opinion on their side, including support from the United States. India can be revisionist with its aims to respect of the line of control. It would shift the onus of decision-making to Pakistan. Pakistani leaders would face immense pressure to restore deterrence through escalation. Pakistan would have no choice but to attack Indian forces. Pakistan might carry out longer-range strikes on military targets in India. Pakistani officials believe that they won the last conflict by successfully escalating. They would implement the same strategy. Pakistan likely would not even wait hours to launch a counteroffensive. In this context, de-escalation and conflict termination will also become far more complex. Given rising Indian nationalism, outside efforts to arrest the crisis are less likely to result in Indian restraint. For Pakistan, hyped fears and existential threat from India are more likely to reinforce risk-taking. Next, selling the IADWS emboldens India to take more aggressive stance against Pakistan and grants them counterforcing capabilities, which makes invasion inevitable and rapid escalation certain. The Balakot crisis proves. That's Ahmed 529. In Balakot, India underestimated the will and ability of Pakistan. Despite aging equipment, India's military modernization witnessed a significant increase in supplies from the United States. The overall balance has clearly favored the IAF. Strategic dissonance plays a part in fueling India's overconfidence about Pakistan. India's posture has begun to show changes through exercises, debates, and doctrines. Senior officials initiated a debate over a shift towards a counterforce posture. With Balakot, both aimed to keep the conflict below the nuclear threshold. However, escalation could have occurred. India would put a greater emphasis on modernization while continuing to gain from defense partners with the U.S. Yet, India's conventional modernization can be deployed against Pakistan. The growing unpredictability of dual-use platforms produce unintended consequences. Rapid escalation is certain. If a large-scale counterforce strikes, even with conventional warheads, attempts to degrade Pakistan's assets. A counterforce strike is a recipe for rapid vertical escalation. India's modernization risk triggering deterrence failure. Should asymmetries continue, they will encourage belligerency, exacerbate the arms race instability, and incentivize preemptive proclivities. Next, the nuclear war between India and Pakistan directly kills hundreds of millions, triggers global mass starvation, and wrecks the ecosystem. That's Johnson in 19. The conflagration might start with the Indian forces entering Pakistan. Pakistan responds with a handful of tactical nuclear weapons. India responds with nukes. 100 Indian nukes hit cities in Pakistan, while 150 Pakistani airbursts hit cities in India. This would be the deaths of 125 million people inside of a week. The soot lifted in the upper troposphere would absorb sunlight. It can encircle the planet. Soot would block 30% of the sun's light globally. The cooling would decrease rainfall by 30% globally. If in India and central China, precipitation would drop to nearly zero. Temperatures declining to values not seen on Earth since the Ice Age. Global disaster threatening food production, worldwide, and mass starvation. Next, the fallout creates an ice age and a mass starvation and mass extinction at every life level. That's star 15. If we allow it to happen, such a war would be a mass extinction event that ends human history. The nuclear war that would cause human extinction should really be considered as the ultimate criminal act. A nuclear war would create a post-war environment in which for many years it would be too cold and dark to even grow food. Most forms of complex life would vanish forever. Radioactive fallout would poison the biosphere. Tons of smoke would act to destroy the Earth's ozone layer. Research predicts virtually any nuclear war, fought with even a fraction of nuclear arsenals, would leave the Earth uninhabitable. Thus, the plan. The United States federal government should substantially reduce foreign military sales and direct commercial sales of the integrated air defense weapons system to India. The final contention is solvency. The IADWS will disrupt the strategic balance between India and Pakistan. It increases the likelihood of the disputes crossing the threshold to full-fledged war. The US should end the sale. That's Zarar, March 25th. South Asia cannot afford another weapons race between India and Pakistan under continued aggression of the present Indian regime. Pakistan's Foreign Office has expressed concerns over the IADWS sale to India. Such a deal would fuel offensive posturing of India, disturb the strategic balance, putting Pakistan into another security dilemma. Such a sophisticated weapons system in India carries implications for Pakistan, will bring repercussions for the whole region. Indian political and military leadership have repeatedly threatened Pakistan with the intent to be more aggressive. IADWS signals the intensity of airspace violation by India. The air defense weapons system sale to India shows the US's unwillingness to keep the regional equilibrium intact. Despite Indian government's blatant aggression and adventurism, India indicates the deliberate neglect of regional peace, puts Pakistan under pressure. India is likely to become belligerent and would increase the chances of warfighting that could cross the threshold. Major powers must ensure stability via initiatives which would encourage both sides to avoid escalation. Next, restoring mutually assured destruction is the best option for stability between India and Pakistan. India is attempting to destroy the status quo deterrence balance. That's Gershwami, 18. The DSEA has approved the acquisition of the NASAMS-2 from the United States. Nuclear deterrence is still based off MAD. Any debilitating first strike would be responded to with a massive retaliation. The fact that 3/4 of a century after the nuclear genie was uncorked, we have not had a nuclear weapons use is living proof of its robust common sense. Deterrence was based off no escape from MAD. Credibility depends on reducing the uncertainty of use. The Indian missile system only increases them. The two South Asian nuclear powers have a local version of MAD in place. MAD is an eminently sensible doctrine. Leave MAD alone.